The summer of 2001, I went on an epic road trip with my then boyfriend, Chris, who had just graduated from college with a political science degree. I was between colleges, shall we say, which sounds a little nicer than had dropped out and not yet transferred anywhere else. And during that summer, I said epic. People use that word a lot, so I will be specific. 3 months, 30,000 miles, all 48 contiguous United States. We hit them all in one summer. And it was the kind of foolhardy move that you can only do when you're 21 and 22 years old, and it seems like a good idea to live a quarter of a year in a blue 2-door Ford Escort. But it was romantic to us, you know, and I don't mean romantic in the lovey-dovey Hallmark way, because that was not me and Chris. We didn't go to anarchist book fairs, but we were liberals, goddammit. And we had really been drawn together by our mutual devastation of the election of 2000, which so devastated us that we were sort of bonded together through our mutual dislike and distrust of the resident-in-chief at that time. And our mutual love of 1960s and early 70s protest culture and pop culture that was associated with it, specifically the music, the films. He was really into like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, and I was really into like Peter, Paul and Mary and the Monkees. Have you ever seen Head? That's a weird movie. But so we were driven by the spirit of the road, that kind of romantic. We were in search of America, right? We wanted, well, kind of like Walt Whitman's America, Allen Ginsberg's America. I think what we were looking for was the America that Simon and Garfunkel sang about on the soundtrack to The Graduate, which was a big deal to us at the time. So we hit the road and we wanted to hit as many national parks as we could. And we did that. We hit, I won't exhaust you with the list, but most of them, at least within the contiguous 48. And we were looking for America, and we found it when we ate deep dish pizza in Chicago, when we had gumbo in New Orleans, when we had hot dogs in the bleachers at Yankee Stadium. We found America in St. Louis and Detroit and Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. and Dallas and Los Angeles and just all the points in between. It was there. But where we really found it, I think, was in the national parks. And most specifically, the moment for me where I came face to face with what it really means to me to be American happened at Yellowstone National Park, the mother of all national parks, if you're familiar. And it was our second night backcountry camping at Yellowstone. And we'd been on the in the villages and on the roads of Yellowstone during the day. It was July, it was high tourist season. We'd been on the road for about a month at this point. And with all the tourists who were on the road, we backcountry camped the night before and then got back in the blue 2-door Ford Escort, got on the roads, dealt with traffic, dealt with all the people, and so when we got to the trailhead, we were just too glad to get away from it all and get back in the backcountry. But we got there late. And so we still had 2.5 miles to hike before we would get to our campsite for the night. And we had to do double time so that we would get there before it was dark, because it's really not a lot of fun to pitch a tent and make camp in the dark. So Chris was really still the more experienced backpacker of us both, and he did a pretty good job with the trail, booking it double time with most of the gear on his back, and what half of it I had, I was struggling underneath, and I didn't really get a chance to enjoy the trail along the way, which was alongside a little creek, and there were wildflowers everywhere, but we were watching the sun and trying to beat it to the horizon. So we get to the end of the trail, and when I see the campsite, I am floored. This is the most beautiful sort of spot of land I have ever seen. Our campsite is going to be inside this little grove of trees that's on a hillside next to a meadow overlooking a little lake that's sparkling in the late afternoon sun. And all I wanted to do was throw my pack down and relax on that carpet of green grass and enjoy the nature and the solitude, but there was no time for that. I had to get to work. And so, well, we had to get to work. And we decided to divvy up the labor. Chris was going to gather the firewood and string up the bear canister and start the fire and start our dinner. And I was going to pitch the tent. And I'd done it a couple times before, and I was starting to get pretty good at it. And I was really absorbed in my time trial. I was really focused on, putting the tent together right and getting it up as fast as I could so that I could help Chris with the dinner. And then he walked over to me, and he put a hand on my shoulder. It was sort of an uncharacteristically tender move on his part. And he leaned in and said, "There's a moose." I said, "Nuh-uh, you're pulling my..." But then I saw his face. And I followed his finger. Holy shit, that is a moose. It was maybe 20 feet away from our campsite. Now, once upon a time, I thought that moose should not be terrifying. When I was a child, moose seemed like the coolest animals there were, and I knew this because of cartoons. So Rocky and Bullwinkle, of course. If you were a child in the early 80s, you might know the Get Along Gang. Anyone? Get Along Gang? They had a leader named Montgomery, a moose. Or if you were ever at Disneyland when they still had Bear Country Jamboree, there was a talking animatronic moose named Melvin, which is also my father's name. And he was kind of a, sort of a goofy guy. So I thought that moose were really friendly and funny and silly, and I really wanted to see one. And I had been telling Chris since our trip began, and ever since we crossed the Idaho Panhandle, basically, that if we did not see a moose on this trip in its natural habitat, the whole thing was a bust, as far as I was concerned. I was really excited to see a moose. So when he told me, there's a moose, my first reaction was, you're pulling my leg. I've been wanting to see a moose, but then when I saw it, a lot of different things happened all at once. I did not pee myself, somehow, because I was afraid, because this was a massive, massive creature, like 7 feet tall and like 1,000 pounds, with like a 6-foot, rack of antlers on its head, and I was just like, that is huge. And it's a vegetarian, which is good, but just like all muscle, and like it just looked fast. These slender little legs, but the massive hulking body and that massive head of antlers was scary to me. But I was feeling more than just scary. There was something else going on. I was also in awe of the moose's beauty, because it was a very beautiful creature. But there was something else that was happening to me in that moment, and it was this discomfort that came out of the feeling that I was having that I was trespassing. I had this sudden moment where I realized that throughout the whole of the American West that Chris and I had been hiking and camping and spending our time in, I'd been sort of unconsciously treating it like it was a museum or a zoo, or just something that was there for like an amusement park that was just there for me to enjoy for my benefit. And when I came face to face with the moose, that feeling suddenly was gone. I mean, here Chris and I we were thinking to ourselves, we've got our federal seal of approval from the National Park Service. We paid our fee, we've got our permits, this campsite is ours for the night. But moose can't read. So the permit wasn't going to do us a whole lot of good in this instance. And we also thought, because we were good, liberals, and very green, and we drove, our high MPG compact economy vehicle, and we recycle, and we ride bikes, and we shop the co-op, that probably we deserve this park even more than all these tourists in their SUVs on the roads, who completely don't even get off the roads, and like 90% of the visitors to Yellowstone wouldn't even come this far into the wilderness that we've come. But were we ready for it? Looking at that moose, I wasn't sure. I knew now that I was in his house. And it was a frightening moment. It seemed like those 3 or 4 seconds that the moose stopped in his tracks to look at me and Chris, they were just a couple of seconds, but they felt like an eternity. And then the moose just went on his way, and we were pardoned. We shared a little laugh, and it took a minute for my adrenaline to get back down, because that had been a scary moment. But it was the moment I really came face to face with what it means to be American. And in that moment, the moose's indifference felt like grace. Thank you.